Tony D and Little Joan with a screenwriter's tips on titles. And we've talked about this before, but I want to talk about it again. More thoughts on how important the title is for your screenplay, story, or whatever. Smash like and subscribe. Thank you for smash liking and subscribing. Check out my books, The Pineys, books 1 through 16, available at Amazon.com. Don't forget, Kindle Unlimited is free. So, titles. Man, you gotta have a good title, especially for a movie. Here is Amazon, and I've noticed like Amazon just has so many freaking titles I never heard of sometimes. Sometimes they have name actors in them, because a lot of times they do make movies that kind of, with name actors that sort of fade into the background, and you either forget about them or they just never got any wide distribution. And here's something called the Trump prophecy. They never got any wide distribution, and they just kind of go nowhere, and then they end up on a streaming platform somewhere when the the owners just kind of say, screw it, let's just get some money for this. But you need a good title. So here's a title of a movie. This Beautiful Fantastic. That's a bad title in my view. Why? Because it doesn't mean anything to me. It's kind of a confusing title. The movie poster doesn't help it, really. Yeah, it's something about beauty, but it's too esoteric. And I often tell a story when I do like writing stuff and tell stories about writers. I tell the story of how back in the day when I was doing comics, I was discussing with another creator titles, and he had a comic book. I think it was called Equus. Equus, Equuis, something like that. And it was about a guy who was like he was an alien horse guy, and he had crashed on this planet, and he was trapped there in this medieval world because, I don't know, his ship broke or whatever. And but he looked like a horse. It wasn't a super strong concept, but a fish out of water guy trapped on a planet, that can work. But I said to him, Equus doesn't really mean anything to me. And when I go into the comic book store, just like when I look at streaming, I look at the titles and I just like burn through them. And that's what people do, right? You scroll through and you're looking for an interesting movie, and you have maybe 10 seconds to interest someone, and the title brings them in at least far enough that they can look a little deeper. And if you don't have something, or if your title's so esoteric it just doesn't mean anything to them, they just pass you right by. So Equus was, I said, an example of a bad title. Like if I had named the comic, I would have named it something like Stranded, or Stranded on Planet X, or whatever, because it would have implied what the story was about, which was about an alien stranded on a planet, which, that implies the plot, and then I could look into it deeper if that's something that interests me. You don't want to get too clunky with it, but you want to give the person information. Now, the most base level title you could have for something is the character's name. Here's a movie called Ava, which I assume is the Jessica Chastain. I assume that's the name of the character. Now, Jessica Chastain's hot. She's on the cover. She's got a gun in her hand. So that's appealing. You can infer what the movie's about. It's about some spy, hot chick spy named Ava. And even you got this Amazon original from 2023. Tommy Lee Jones and Jamie Foxx in The Burial. That kind of implies something. Something to do with a funeral, maybe. I don't know if it's two funeral home guys. They're not dressed in black, so I think looks like two lawyers, maybe. and they're going to go after each other for something over a burial or whatever. But putting the word "the" in front of it also makes it a little more important. So, for instance, I just looked at a movie called Last Swim. It's not called The Last Swim. It's called Last Swim. Kind of makes it feel like nothing. But when you put the in front of it, The Last Swim, you're like sort of implying it's important. Last Swim, just like, oh, that's the last swim. Or Last Swim. Last Swim, everybody. But it's The Last Swim. It implies more specificity. So when you name your movie or story or TV show or comic book, you got to come up with a good name. Now here's Sicario. Everybody knows the movie Sicario, I think. But that's pretty cool too, because even though you probably don't know what the word means offhand, but if you look it up, it means hitman in Spanish, and that's kind of cool. So here you have The Holdovers. This was, I hear, a pretty decent movie. The Holdovers, that's what the characters are. They were holed over at college for a break. Let's see. So all sorts of titles that, man, you just see these movies and you wonder, who greenlit this stuff? Let's see. Here's a good title. This is Arnold Schwarzenegger in Last Stand, The Last Stand. That's always a good title because it's an action movie. A Fool and His Money. A lot of people are doing phrases these days. This is from 89, but that's a good title. I don't know if it did anything. It starred Sandra Bullock when she was a lot younger and looked completely different. Wow. Wow, her face is different in that picture. Interesting. Hey, here's a bad title, I think. Passengers. This was that Chris Pratt, Jennifer Lawrence movie. They're passengers on a spaceship. Although that kind of describes the story, it's too generic. It could be a lot of different things, right? It could be passengers on a boat, passengers on a plane, passengers on a train. Too generic. You want to get something a little more specific than that, I think, because it was a sci-fi movie. Here's another movie I never heard of. John Travolta, Morgan Freeman, Poison Rose. Didn't even hear this flick. It's amazing how many flicks there are, and they're two fairly big names. Poison Rose. I mean, I have no idea what it is. Now here's a movie. Now just because you know what it is doesn't necessarily mean it's a good movie. Here's The Rebound. Obviously that's some relationship movie. Somebody's on the rebound, and it looks like a comedy from the wacky picture it's in. But yeah, you want to pick a title that kind of sells it. True stories are different. You got this Matt Damon story called Stillwater. That's based on a true story. It's a little different. You got to do more with the visuals. You got to pick titles that sort of reach people. Here's a great one, 24 Hours to Live. That's a great title, in my view. It's exciting. I know exactly what that movie is. That's going to be badass. Ethan Hawke. I might see that thing. 4 stars. You ever notice how a lot of things on Amazon just gets 4 stars on the movies? I've noticed that. Here's a light romantic comedy, Puppy Love. Joe Bell. This is probably a true story or based on a true story. But yeah, I mean, titles help a lot. And it can, especially if you're an unknown quantity trying to sell a story, your title can help a lot. I mean, you don't have big names in your movie. You don't have a forward by Stephen King in your book, or you don't have Marvel Comics publishing you. You want something that's going to sell just straight up to readers or viewers. And you'll notice too, and this is another thing they do with movies, there's so many movies, they actually start changing the titles very subtly. So this is Badland, right? But there's been movies called Badlands with an S and The Badlands, and probably even a one with a Z on the end of it. So pick your titles very carefully, I say. Think about it. Think about how it presents to your reader. And also take yourself out of the equation too. Think about a total stranger seeing the title of your project and how that'll be processed in their own brain. You know, a lot of people just don't think that. They just don't think that. So here's a religious movie, The Gospel According to Matthew. That's pretty on the nose. Straight up, it's going to appeal to its audience. The Legend of Oz, Dorothy's Return. I mean, I never heard of it, but I'm sure for the audience, that's a good, it's a good way to reach them. The visuals help too. You know, you got this movie called Wild Target. This one can kind of go either way. I think I saw this movie. Only God Forgives. That's got to be like a dark movie with Ryan Gosling. Surrounded. It's kind of a Western. That works. But here's one. It's a little too generic. My Policeman. Don't know what that means. The picture isn't really helping me. The Gardener. I think I saw this movie. Is this the one with, or did I? No. It's another movie with a gardener in it. Again, kind of generic. And not really selling me on anything. Message Man. I mean, the poster helps with the guns and everything. But well, here's a woke one. Frida. That works because it's about a specific person. That's their last name. Silver and the Book of Dreams. It kind of works. Here's a rom-com, 12 Days of Giving. I don't know if that works. It's a little off. That could kind of go into religious territory. Before All Others, that looks religious. But yeah, if you don't have a big name, you need a title. Now here's this slasher movie that came out last year or 2 years ago. It's called Totally Killer, and so it's this weird movie where this character goes back to the 80s and has to stop this 80s slasher killer, and she's sort of trapped in an 80s movie to save her mom and her friends or whatever. It's a good title. I don't think it's a good movie. It didn't look that great, but it's a solid title for what it is, right? It's an 80s saying, totally killer, dude. So that ties into the movie. And so it works. And then it's also about an actual killer. Um, a Snow Globe Christmas. Well, there you go. Christmas movie. That works. The Good Guy. Kind of too generic. Too generic. That could be a lot of different things. The picture's not helping at all. It's just some actors. Our Friend. I don't know. Is this about a three-way? I don't know. But, yeah, it's a little too generic for me, too. So, you need titles that are going to sell it. Like, here's Winter's Bone. This is what the Jennifer Lawrence movie. I think that worked because of about, you know, a woman who has to save her house in the Ozarks, and it's winter time at the time. So it was kind of harsh, but it doesn't really mean much on its own, Winter's Bone. But it's a drama. I think it kind of worked. It's not super specific. And you can get too specific. Here's a too specific one. Sitting in Bars with Cake. That's what the movie's about. It's weird. It's off. I don't know what that is, really, but that's what the movie's about. Who's Watching Over? Again, bit too broad. Poster's really not helping me. The Goldfinch also doesn't work for me. So, you know, you have to pick titles that are really going to sell the movie. Sell the movie. Going with just the character's name, yeah, not really going to work. The Other Guys, I think that one works. Comedies get a little bit more leeway, as always. But yeah, so when you sit down to make your project, you know, you could always change the title too. You know, when you're working on it, you might have a working title. That's what they mean by working title. You just call it something, and some generic title, and then later you work on it. You really have to think what it means, and sometimes you have to finish the story to really figure that out. Really get at what the heart of your story is. So, anyhow, that's it for me, Tony D and Little Joan. Thanks for listening to me ramble, screenwriters. I will be doing the live stream today at 7 instead of on Sunday because the Super Bowl conflict. So join me tonight at 7 for the live stream.